And now for our program. Again, our moderator this evening is Maria Howell, class of 91. She is the Senior Major Gifts Officer for Women's Philanthropy and is sponsored by Women Act, Aspire, Create, and Transform. I'm now honored to turn the program over to Maria, who will introduce the rest of our panel.
Thanks so much, Judith. As Judith said, my name is Maria Howell, and I'm a proud member of the class of 1991, and I also have the joy of being the mother of a son in the class of 2025. I've been back working at the college for 13 years, and in my newest role, I have the privilege of leading Davidson's women's philanthropy efforts, as Judith said, through Women Act, which is a relatively new initiative designed to expand engagement, create leadership opportunities, and bring women together like we are tonight. Women Act stands for Aspire, Create, Transform, reflecting our mission to aspire to make a difference for Davidson as we create new opportunities and pathways to transform student experiences and the way graduates lead and serve in the world. This dynamic network is dedicated to empowering and uniting women through leadership, philanthropy, and meaningful engagement. And it fosters opportunities for connection, mentorship, and influence, enabling women to make a lasting impact on Davidson and beyond. In our inaugural year, more than 425 alums, men and women, supported the newly established Wildcat Women Fund, which will directly support student health and well-being initiatives on campus. I'll be actually hosting a conversation with the Director of Student Health and Wellbeing, Stephen Yoakley, on May the 7th, and I hope that all of you tonight can join us then. During the first 2 years of this program, Women Act, women made more than $30 million in leadership gifts to the college. That is an extraordinary testament to the power of women stepping up and leading at Davidson. We still have a ways to go, and I hope that you'll join us in those efforts. Tonight, we are glad you have joined us for a panel featuring alumni celebrating reunions this year. Together, we will explore how the stories we tell and the ones we live shape our perspectives, our relationships, and leadership. I have found that one of the easiest ways to start a conversation among Davidson graduates is to ask them about their favorite professor or what they're currently reading or learning. One thing we all share at Davidson is a love of lifelong learning. Since returning to Davidson, I've had the privilege of attending every reunion, and one of my favorite events has always been the back-to-school classes. This is what you're joining tonight. It's a class inspired by the lively conversations that take place both inside and outside of the classrooms at Davidson College. Whether you are celebrating a reunion this June or and also the registrations just opened today for a reunion, so I hope that you will sign up and join us. Or you are simply here tonight to engage in thoughtful discussion, we are so glad that you have joined us for this panel. You're in for a treat. When we met last week to talk, I wanted to stay on and keep talking to these amazing women. I thought I would begin this conversation with a question for all of our panelists to answer. Before we dive in, I'll share a brief introduction for each of them. Then I'll ask them to answer the question, and then we'll come back to being able to answer some other questions for each panelist. I'm going to start tonight with Yvette Pita Frampton. She's an award-winning independent filmmaker whose work has screened at South by Southwest, the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival, the HBO Urban World Film Festival, and the New York International Latino Film Festival, among others. She's taught film theory, writing, editing, and production at Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, CU Denver College of Arts and Media, and the Colorado Film School at the Community College of Aurora. As a community leader, she's served as a trustee for our own Davidson College and a board member for the Denver Health Foundation, the Level 1 Society, also Davidson College Alumni Association Board, and the Documentary Cinema Institute. She currently serves on the board for Series Fest, Grayland Country Day School in Denver, Colorado, the Colorado Music Hall of Fame, the Cuba Impendre Foundation, and as an advisory board member for the Gates Institute for Regenerative Medicine and a member of the Cuba Study Group. She's also been an active volunteer for Project Cure. It's hard to imagine that she has any time for anything else. She and her husband, Chris, have 3 children, one of whom attends Davidson. Yvette holds a BA in English from Davidson in 1995 when she graduated, and an MFA in film directing from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. So Yvette, I'm starting with you with the first question. Each of you brings a different lens and a gift of storytelling. Yours is through film. I'd love to start by hearing how you discovered your passion for your journey since Davidson. What led you to where you are today?
Thanks, Maria. First of all, thank you so much for coordinating and putting together this panel and all of the other educational panels that you are offering. There's so many interesting topics. So I thank you for keep getting us all together in these ways. I also, by the way, have one more daughter who will be an incoming freshman at Davidson this coming fall. So I was thinking about how to answer this question. And I mean, I think in a lot of ways, my path, A, wasn't completely linear, and then also B, it's still evolving even to this day. So I can talk about how I got to where I am now, but it's still changing, and there's still more changes to come. But I think looking back, and I don't know that I could say I intentionally was thinking these things as I was going along the way, but I think I always was I came at things through a lens of curiosity about people and just kind of wanting to get to know people better and what really makes somebody tick and who they are beyond, just the surface level. And so as an English major at Davidson, I love delving into characters and literature, and that then took me to, well, maybe I can try to write some of my own stories. And so I really loved creative writing. And that was sort of the genesis of what ended up evolving into storytelling through filmmaking and through visual medium. But it's funny because interestingly, at some point about 7, 8 years after getting out of Davidson and sort of along that path, I started thinking maybe I should have gone to med school, which is what my dad wanted me to do. And he's a doctor, and he was all along the way, well, you can take post-bac med school classes now, and we just moved to Denver, and I started seriously considering it. And I had a student at the Community College of Aurora, and his career was, he was a career coach. And so I told him I was kind of grappling with this. And so he gave me this really long test, and I took it. And funny enough, the 2 careers that came out as top for me were filmmaker or doctor. And it was just the craziest thing. And I thought, well, what is it that brings these 2 together? What are the elements that, that these have in common? And I mean, I do think it is a curiosity about people. It's something, learning about somebody in an important moment in their life. And I don't know, just wanting to know really more and delve deeper with people. I think that's kind of where my impetus came from, my passion came from.
That's fascinating. The doctor and the filmmaker. We're all going to ask you next, when are you making a documentary about medicine? So that's our next question for you. Next, we're going to go to Reverend Caroline Levy Cupp, who graduated in 2005 and is a Presbyterian Church USA pastor and a writer, and the author of several books on disability and relationships. Her books include This Is How We Play, This Is How We Talk, and The Right to Belong, which are all with Penguin Random House, as well as Dateable with Hatchet. Her writing has also been published in Yale Divinity School's journal Reflections, and she's been featured on podcasts, including Slate's How To and Motherly. Caroline graduated from Davidson with a BA, Yale Divinity School with an MDiv, and received a master's degree in bioethics. I'm noticing something between different careers and going into medicine or bioethics from the University of Pennsylvania. She has worked in clinical settings as a hospital chaplain, supervised graduate students in pastoral care, and currently serves as senior associate pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Westchester, Pennsylvania. There, she supports the congregation's housing justice initiatives in the local community. Caroline lives in the Philadelphia suburbs with her husband and son. So Caroline, I'm going to ask you the same question. How did you discover your passion for your journey since Davidson, and what led you to where you are today?
Right. So I'll echo Yvette's thank you for having me on and inviting me to be part of this amazing panel of women. And it's so much fun to look at the participant list and see beloved, familiar names pop up there. So thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. Prepping for this seminar made me realize how much of the time that the stories that shape our lives are the ones that other people see in us before we see them. My senior year at Davidson, I was a total mess. I was trying to figure out what the next step was and what that looked like. And Chaplain Rob Spock encouraged me to apply to divinity school, which up until that point was so far off my radar that I think like radars do not go that far. But he seemed so genuinely certain that this was a path that I should explore that I really borrowed his assurance and quickly realized that that was exactly the correct next step. And that same sort of pattern happened again and again over the next few years. When I wasn't certain about what the next step was, or maybe I thought I was certain, some observation or challenge or joke would come from a mentor or a friend, and it made whatever that next thing was, whether it was a career change or meeting my husband, just totally click. And I think in a culture where personal authenticity is such a core virtue, that relational wisdom can sometimes feel a little suspicious. It's like, is there a lack of confidence there? But for me, it's always felt like a gift that I love that idea that sometimes the stories, that sometimes our stories are carried by others until we can hold them for ourselves. So I went to seminary, I worked as a hospital chaplain. I'm now a parish minister. And the great joy in this field is exploring how people's individual stories connect with these big stories of faith and how to communicate and translate ancient stories so that they maintain that comfort and challenge and rootedness in a contemporary world, and that they can look very different, whether it's sitting with somebody at a bedside, or wrangling a group of middle schoolers on a retreat. Those stories are still sort of playing out, and getting to be part of that and part of sort of shepherding those stories. From the writing perspective, that happened almost by accident. About 5 years ago, actually it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, my son had just turned 3, and I was looking for a book where the parents in the book had a disability, or one of the parents had one. I couldn't find any, and so I reached out to Jessica Slice, also Davidson, class of 05, and said, you're a writer, you're a disabled parent, do you have any books? And she said she would look for them, and we couldn't find any. So we pitched this idea of a picture book based on the lives of disabled families, and who agreed to be interviewed about how they play together. And a bunch of other Davidson people were sort of part of this writing process in different ways. And writing that book made me realize that one of the great joys of life is giving people space to tell their stories and to be part of connecting them with one another.
Wow. I've got 2 things I tried to write down, but I can't find my pen right now. But one was, I think you said, and I wanted you to say it again, like other people hold our stories until we can hold them ourselves. And then that sort of the way that the last thing you just said about having other people tell stories, and allowing them and giving them the space to tell their stories. That's deep. That's our deep thoughts for the night for everybody. So thanks. This Kathy Bray entered Davidson with the class of 1984, but graduated from Davidson in 1985. She spent her junior year in France with the Davidson Study Abroad program, and then took a leave of absence from the college the following year to pursue a 1-year internship with USAID in Senegal, West Africa. Her early professional years were connected to international relief and development work before entering the field of education, which led her back to Davidson, first as the Associate Dean of Admission and Financial Aid, and then as the Associate Dean of Students for 15 years. Kathy went back to get her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling after her time at Davidson, and she currently practices counseling at KBray Counseling in the town of Davidson. And Kathy didn't say this, but I'm going to add that when she left as the Associate Dean of Students, the students asked to name the Women's Leadership Conference in her honor. Kathy, I'm going to ask you the same question. How did you discover your passion for your journey since Davidson, and what led you to where you are today?
Well, I want to join the chorus of thank yous to the college and to you, Maria, and Judith and Carissa, to the staff who are making this possible. Boy, Caroline, I was really struck, just like Maria was, by your comment about holding stories for people. I think that's really lovely. Thank you for that. So my professional journey since graduating from Davidson was, we'll call it circuitous, but as Maria said, it did lead me back to Davidson, where for 5 years I was the Associate Dean of Admission and Financial Aid, and then for 15 years, the Associate Dean of Students. And the 20 years that I worked on campus were really all about stories, and mostly student stories, but also, you know, stories with and about faculty members and stories involving staff members from all points on campus. And it was a real privilege to witness and to, in some cases, journey along with students as they did the really hard work of figuring out who they were and what space they wanted to occupy in this world. And one of the things that I observed, one thing that was in common for some students was that the narratives that they told themselves about themselves were informed by messages that they had received from family members, not surprisingly, friends, coaches, in some cases their church, in some cases a drunk classmate on Patterson Court, certainly social media and society at large. And sometimes these messages were accurate reflections and loving and encouraging, and sometimes they were not. And they led to inaccurate stories that became part of the student's narrative about themselves. An example that comes to mind is the belief that their worth is based solely on their achievements or their pursuit of perfectionism. And so, having observed this for years, I think storytelling, and specifically the stories we tell ourselves, is part of what led me to this chapter in my professional life, you know, specifically helping people to explore the narrative that they tell themselves about themselves.
I feel like we could just go on about that for a long time as well. The stories we tell ourselves, the stories that are accurate, the stories that are inaccurate, and the questions that I feel like I'm still asking is like, what did you say? Something like what space we want to occupy in the world. And I'm still trying to figure that out. So maybe I'll have to talk to you a little bit again later, Kathy. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to introduce Makayla Binter. She's a creator, organizer, and catalyst based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Originally from upstate New York, she moved to North Carolina to get her degree in biology and studio art at Davidson, graduating in 2020. Upon receiving her master's degree in urban design at UNC Charlotte in 2022, she took her knowledge to create and curate creative activations for partners and businesses like Converse, Ally, TD Bank, Adobe, the Carolina Panthers, ACC, Sierra Nevada, and the Charlotte Hornets. She paints on canvas and murals with acrylic and spray paint, customizes clothing items like hats, jerseys, and shoes, and completes digital drawings of various sizes and installation purposes. She works for Charlotte, is creative as the communications catalyst, hosts events and creative experiences, facilitates workshops, and manages social media accounts. And I'm trying to figure out what she can do in her free time as well. Makayla, you have looked at the world through, as you say, this creative stories through sort of multimedia ways of doing that in art. How did you discover your passion for your journey since Davidson, and what led you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I guess here goes the chorus one more time. Thank you guys so much for this opportunity, and I'm really glad we all get to hop on the phone again and chat a little longer. I definitely got started pretty early at Davidson, but I definitely say it was my senior year that, or I guess my heading into my senior spring, that really took off for me. I knew I wanted to be visual arts somehow, some way. When I came in, I also started off with a biology pre-med ideation that literally lasted for a single organic chemistry class, if I even made it that far, because I probably didn't. But I decided to double major. We had some pretty crazy things happen throughout my junior like fall and spring. And so I was kind of tired of having this ongoing conversation about why, like, 2016, Keith Lamont Scott was shot and killed by police. And it felt like we had a protest, but it then like the conversation just didn't continue, or at least in the circles I was in, they didn't continue. And then we had some other conversations kind of like that my junior and senior year. And I was like, why do I feel like we keep having these like cyclical conversations, but like after a couple of days, we kind of went back to our Davidson ways, where like, there's homework, there's after school curriculars, and there's a lot of things that we're focusing on too. So I was like, well, what if we had an art project on campus? And so with that thought, I applied with the assistance of some folks in the creative or in the community engagement center up in the Union. We went after the Projects for Peace grant, which was $10,000, and got it. So after an interactive mural, some research on campus during the summer, several rounds of design edits from community engagement from staff, faculty, alumni, current students. Two panels were built on campus, installed for a year. They looked at colorism, racism, homophobia, and classism racism as they affected students and staff and alumni on campus. That research project then, like after graduation, or what was kind of my graduation, which was the 2020 Zoom graduation, I was notified that that project was able to be moved into Uptown Charlotte at the steps of the Levy Museum of, the Levy, the old location for the new Levy Museum in New South. And I was like, oh, wow, this is huge. And that same day, I was supposed to start a program with Duke for a athletic training program. And I obviously didn't do that. So that same week, I had applied for a mural through the placemaking program through the city. I got that mural. And so I realized, oh my gosh, okay, maybe there's something with this art career option, one that I guess I never put actual emphasis or thought into. And I think it was that process of not only learning how to share my own experience as a Davidson student, like with that project, but then also the ways in which I was able to gain inspiration and guidance from the community outside of Davidson, like the art community in Charlotte. That's where I got introduced to a lot of the people that I now consider my mentors, my friends, my collaborators, and my creative troublemakers, is because of those initial conversations from that project. And I would say that because I had to learn how to share other stories in a respectful way, while also rooting it in history and research, it was actually pretty mind-boggling to me, but then also completely shifted the way in which I perceived my art career. And so now I feel like whenever I get the chance. I'm not only telling my story as a creative and as a person and a woman living in the world we're in right now, but I feel like I'm also sharing an experience and a story that is also incredibly impactful for younger and younger artists, women, and youth who see creativity and creative entrepreneurship as an opportunity and an option.
That's incredible to have that with only 5 years, being 5 years out of Davidson College. Just
And don't remind me.
Only 5 years out. So all of you are inspirations for other people, and all of you have talked a little bit about how you have shared your stories and shared other people's stories. I am going to move on to some sort of specific questions for each of you. And for those of you who are listening, I just wanted to remind you that we have a Q&A little button at the bottom here, that if you have a question that you want to ask one or all of these participants, please feel free to add your question to the Q&A. I'll try to get to as many of those as I can, but I'm going to keep asking questions until I get to. So Yvette, I'll start again with you. Was there a specific moment or experience at Davidson that influenced the story you tell or the path that you've taken?
Well, and it's interesting hearing all of the opportunities that Makayla had at Davidson. I would say that there's something that's extraordinary about a place like Davidson, as small as it is, how many opportunities actually exist within that community and the ecosphere of Davidson. And if you can just listen for them and take advantage of them, you never know where they're going to take you. So I was an English major, as I said, and I was thinking about going into journalism. And my senior year, I did an independent study with Dr. Hernandez because I was able to get an internship at the NBC News Channel in Spanish, the International Spanish Channel, that happened to be broadcast out of the NBC affiliate in Charlotte. And so I would, drive down there at 5 a.m. some mornings, and I was the teleprompter, trying to stay awake, doing the teleprompter for their broadcast. And they just had me doing all sorts of different things. Every time I went in, I didn't know what my task was going to be for that day. And one day they said, oh, we'd like to see if you'll edit together this promo piece for a movie that's going to be coming out. It was actually The Professional with Natalie Portman as a little girl in it. So I'm coming for my 30th reunion. It was a long time ago. And so I got put into a room with some footage that they had. Of course, it's all on tapes. So I was literally going back and forth between the tapes just to pick out clips and put the promo piece together. And that was the first time that I sat down, and it didn't really have a story because it was a promo piece, but it did have a little bit of an arc, and kind of figuring out, how do I tell a story with this material in the time period that, was allotted for it. And it was really fun. It was like putting a puzzle together. And that's when the spark was sort of sparked for me to look into documentary filmmaking, because with documentary, you go out and you shoot footage that you think you have an idea of what it might be, but it never is exactly what you thought it was going to be, because it's real life and it's a real person. There's their story. And then to have all that material in an editing room and to try to figure out, how does this go together and how does this story make sense? And there could be several different ways that story could come together, and it might have a slightly different meaning one way or another. Normally what I like to try to do, I aspire to put together a story that doesn't have its own agenda necessarily, but presents what it is in a way that then the audience can think about it or make an idea of it for themselves. But I like the idea that Caroline was talking about, where somebody else might hold your story before you know. And I think this is related in a way, just that always be open to new ways of looking at things, because I would have never thought that was a way to put a story together, like that puzzle in the editing room the first time that I did it. And it really changed everything for me after that.
That's incredible. I love the concept of trying to have a story without any particular lens. How would you do that? How would you have something that, if you have all of that?
There's always a little bit of subjectiveness in everything that we do, but to try to, it's what makes it more beautiful is when it's not, when an audience member can decide for themselves how they feel about whatever it is.
Thank you. Caroline, back to a little bit of what Kathy was talking about, what are some of the stories you've told yourself along your journey? Perhaps ones that turned out not to be true. And if so, how did you come to recognize and rewrite those narratives for yourself?
Um, So I grew up with cerebral palsy. I have cerebral palsy. And one of the earliest stories that I was shaped by was this very medical narrative that there was something wrong. There was something wrong with me and something broken that sort of set me apart. And actually, speaking of medical narratives, when I was hearing Makayla and others talk about, I was like, we could do a second panel on, I almost went pre-med at Davidson College because I was pre-med for like 10 seconds. Then I was like, this is a terrible idea. I'm gonna, kill everyone I touch because I'm so bad at science. But anyway, when I was feeling this way, the way I understood it, a diagnosis, medical problem, it requires a medical solution. So how I understood my disability was that it was something that was appropriately addressed, fully addressed through surgery, through therapy, through all of the things that the medical world brings with it. Now, I knew that there were other people out there who were disabled, but there wasn't this sense of deep kinship. It was more, and almost it was the opposite. It was the sense that that I should really distance myself and the more the better, because that would mean that I wasn't defined by this characteristic of being impaired. So if anything I couldn't fix then was something that I needed to figure out how to compensate for or how to distract away from. So if I'm like really good and strong over here, then this other piece, this sort of broken piece here, wouldn't be as important and wouldn't take up so much space. And so I threw myself into things like writing, like academics, which I did love and I do love, but they were sort of both doing double duty. It was this idea that like, all right, if I do this and I'm so good and so perfect at it, Kathy, like, yes, all the things you were talking about, but if I'm so sort of competent here, then people won't notice this other thing over here. And it also, I think, meant that I didn't really like asking a lot of people because I felt like just who I am was asking a lot of people. But David, going back a little bit to the prior question at Davidson, my first semester at Davidson freshman seminar, Professor Ann Fox's class was disability literature and theory, and I had never had any exposure growing up to disability history, to disability culture or theology. And then I came into these lectures and suddenly it's like this outline drawing and all of the colors get painted in. And it wasn't that like this medical version went away entirely, but it did just get set next to and sometimes set under other ways of thinking about disability that connected me with a history and a history of these people who were just like brilliant and wise and brave and I felt like much more rooted. So we learned, in this class about disabled writers and academics and artists and educators. And I remember this paper that I wrote in that class about the book Fried Green Tomatoes, where there's this disabled protagonist, but the fact that he's disabled sort of opens up the opportunity for other people to live in these really authentic and life-giving ways. And that was the first time, I think, in that class that I felt like I could have a powerful voice, not to distract from being disabled, but a voice that was informed by disability. And that being disabled was not just something that pulled me away, but was also an invitation into a culture that I felt honored to be part of, rather than feeling like it was a detriment. So obviously, people are people. We don't change, I didn't hit 18 in this class and, everything turned around. But once you see the world as a person who's connected to other people, and those weaknesses are not only liabilities, but they're also places of deep strength, then it's really impossible to go backwards. So that was the start of a retelling of that narrative that continues very much to this day.
Again, I love your lines. You can tell you're a writer. Weaknesses are areas of great strength. finding that. And that's something we can all learn from. Thank you for sharing that. There's someone in the Q&A who actually is sharing that there's a children book author, Jen V. Campbell, who often writes characters with disabilities. So just as you're on your journey, do you already know that?
No, but I'll have to check her out.
Okay,
Thank you.
check her out. So there you go. This is why we are all here together tonight. Thank you for sharing that. Kathy, can you share an example of a story, whether one you've told, lived, or encountered, that shaped your perspective or inspired you to change?
Yes, but can I stop going after Caroline?
Yeah.
Actually, any of the amazing panelists here. Yeah, so I'll tell a story about one of my own experiences. I entered Davidson in 1980, and I think at that point there had been 3 classes of women who had graduated. And I think many of the people who are listening or watching this will remember from their own experiences, or will have heard the stories that there were quite a few vestiges of Davidson's history as a male-only college and a white male college. The vestiges were still very present, and including the legendary urinals left in the women's bathrooms that greeted us, and the trustees' decision that only no more than 30% of the student body could be made up of women. And there were, it was mostly a male faculty and mostly male trustees. It's so great to see the number of women growing on the board. And many of the faculty members and trustees were still pretty vocal in their opposition to admitting women in general. So, and my point is not to vilify the college. That was something that the college had to go through, and aren't we grateful to Sam Spencer and other leaders who shepherded that process. But while it was exciting to be part of the experiment and something, I was grateful, very grateful at the time to be able to attend Davidson, and I remain grateful for that affiliation. It was a challenge not to internalize, at least on some level, the message that we women didn't fully belong. It sort of felt like we had been invited to the dance, but we weren't allowed to join the club. And then fast forward 30-something years to 2011, which is when the college announced that Carol Quillen would be the 18th president of the college and the first woman president in the college's history. And there was so much excitement about that and great hoopla. And I had a surprisingly salty, unexpected reaction to that, which was essentially, it's about damn time. And maybe don't break your arm patting yourself on the back for something that maybe should have happened a decade or 2 ago. So obviously, I kept those thoughts to myself. And a really important side note, it is not, we need to recognize that it is not a coincidence that the college's first woman vice president chaired the search committee that found and hired Carol Quillen. That is Kristen Hills-Bradbury, who is a member of my class, which is very exciting. So, Kristen's presence on the search committee is a really important reminder that who is represented in the room making critical decisions is critically important. So back to my salty attitude. Several months later, when we had the inauguration for President Quillen, I was stunned by my reaction. I was deeply moved watching this incredible woman take the top position at the college. Like I ugly cried. I was so moved by it. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that I was still telling myself the story that I didn't really belong. But once I did realize it, it became my work and my responsibility to change that belief, that narrative in my head. But it required seeing another woman in the top job to be able to do that, because representation matters so much.
It does. And I can imagine the stories that she told to herself, the narratives that she told to herself without seeing someone in that role before.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
Makayla, along the lines of challenges, what challenges have you faced as a woman or any other identities navigating your field? And how have these experiences influenced the way that you approach your storytelling through visual art?
Yeah, at my first, or some of my first art history classes at Davidson, like definitely featured mostly white Western men as like visual artists, right? Not to say that that's like not an example, because obviously it is, but I always felt pretty like underwhelmed, if you will, sometimes by how like the work was dissected. And then I was like, okay, like where who else we got, like this isn't the only person we should be your only group of people we should be talking about based on whatever era it is that we're discussing, right? Especially if artwork is as reflective of current times and present context as it is, right, as a historical reference point. I definitely was just very interested in like how other artists of other demographics, women, Black women predominantly too, who were also making art at that time and required and also deserved like a part of the conversation and critique, right? So as I experienced that, I was like, okay, so I definitely am gonna have to like step up my own research game and make sure that I can I'm also adding to this larger conversation, this larger narrative, especially when we were going through 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement was like really taking up. We had the Black Lives Matter mural in Charlotte was underway. I like knew that this was incredibly important. And also obviously our experience through COVID. I knew that art was going to be a huge part of how we, one, recognized what traumatic experiences we all just had gone through, but then also how we were going to then share this information with people way after us, right? So I basically took up all the art forms I possibly could. I was drawing on my iPad, so I was doing a lot of digital art. I had gotten a camera from Davidson because all the seniors, like art majors, got a grant. So I got an iPad. I had gotten a camera, and I was painting a lot and was trying to figure out, one, how my own perspective and narrative added to the conversation that was already happening in Charlotte with all these like fantastic, amazing artists that I was looking up to. I was seeing as like, again, my mentors or like people who I wanted to be just like. But I was also incredibly nervous of my own skill sets and what I was capable of adding. So I was kind of shying away from all of that. I also think Davidson inherently taught a lot of us how to be leaders. And so, and with a very hard and very strong ability to not know how to say no. So I did a lot of crazy things. I like coordinated like one of my first mural projects right out of Davidson. I want to say literally like the summer I graduated, and I was like working with artists who I thought were like the bee's knees, like these guys are celebrities in my head, and they're coming out and working on a wall with me with paint that got donated, and they're trusting me to lead and facilitate this whole thing, and I'm the youngest person in the space, or at like that specific location. And so I think kind of going back to the question, I think what it takes is like levels of confidence, which I'm like very thankful that Davidson definitely gave me positions to be confident, even if I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And that was through student leadership, that was through like Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, that was through like Davidson Arts and Creative Engagement, just being put in leadership roles, or whether it was going after them or whatever. But then an additional level of delusion, and just feeling like, you know what, I'm going to figure it out along the way. And I have a feeling I'm not going to let myself fail. My mom is sure as hell not going to let me fail. And like the people around me that I was starting to build community with and build friendships with were also very determined to not let me fail. Right. So I think what I've started to realize as a woman, as a Black woman in a creative in Charlotte, is that like it's really all about community at this point. It's really genuinely about how you show up for yourself, how other people show up with you, and then the respect that gets built between people and the connection that gets built. And that's how you truly find like on like representation, and then also community. So I feel like that's kind of where I've like landed thus far, is I'm realizing that there's that yeah, my ability to like now I don't know why the heck my camera just did that. Yeah, just being able to be in community and recognizing that it's not just about me, it's not just about us, it's about like the broader experience of Charlotte and its art and culture scene. And I'm starting to recognize like how powerful and impactful that is when you just show up, whether that's for something like this or showing up at like talking to recent students, or like students who are going to graduate very soon, whether that's talking to youth who are literally like 11 but are entrepreneurs themselves, or if it's talking to adults who are heading into their second career and it just happens to be creative.
Thank you so much. I'm hoping that you'll at some point think about reframing "not let you fail" to "how do I succeed?"
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. But it just definitely like in hindsight, it's like funny to think about because you know, I think sometimes especially as a woman, I think there's like a genuine fear of like no one can see me falter, right? So if you are so it's like there has to be some kind of blind confidence, like some sort of delusion that's just like, you know what, even if I have no idea what is happening, what's going on, I'm not going to let anyone in this room know that. And so definitely yes, but sometimes it did feel like that.
That's great. Thank you. We've got several questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to actually jump to some of those. And so you still have a little bit of time if you have a question. This is sort of for any speaker who feels like answering this. John Paul Schnick wrote, please describe a fork in the road in your life, the opportunity you did not opt for, and the gifts that came from the road that you chose. This is like a sliding doors moment. For those of you who like that movie, which is a long time ago. I think it's the bee's knees. I'm going to now take that word from you, Makayla.
Bray, I'm happy to jump in on that.
Great.
Just because I was thinking about it, and also how it relates to another question that we were going to maybe discuss here, which are what are the challenges as a woman that we found in our field. And it's a little bit ironic because the big fork in the road for me was having children. And I was going to talk about how that probably is the biggest challenge that has presented itself for me as an independent artist. You know, I was only beholden to myself and when I would make projects. And when I had children, everything got a little bit upended, and I was now focused in different ways. And, you know, it's a little embarrassing sometimes. I feel like I sort of fell back into probably a more traditional role than I had imagined. But I will say that those are the greatest gifts that I got, and I love our kids. And, and I'm glad that I made the choices that I did. And what I'm learning, hopefully now, is that, I'm only going to my 30th reunion. My life isn't over, and there are many things that I'm going to be able to do now in this third act of my life. And I see other people do it. I have a good friend here. She's 83. She grew up in Cuba. And she has more energy than anyone you ever met. And she goes to Cuba regularly and films documentaries about Cuban architecture that show on PBS. So, it's like the sky's the limit. We don't have to do everything when we're young. We can just, I guess, roll along with life a little bit. And the relationships that we have are the most important part. And so I think I lean toward that. I never know if that was the right decision exactly, but it was what worked for me.
And it's your decision. And it's the one that, and sometimes when you roll along with life a little bit, you have a different lens that you can share and open up when you decide to go back to it. And there's a question for Caroline in the Q&A. How important is storytelling to your preaching? And this is from Jim Stokes.
Hi, thanks, Jim. So it's all the way important. This preaching is storytelling, and it's storytelling of the faith, the story of faith, but it's also storytelling to me about people who translate those stories in their own lives, their experience. And so it's so much fun, for me, it's so much fun, and it's also a responsibility because while I have personal things that will sometimes fit in, I also think there's also sort of, Makayla, what you were talking about, like whose voices are being shared as part of this. And a pulpit is a place where stories are shared. And so for me, it's exciting and challenging to figure out, like, all right, so who do I draw from here? Who do I draw from here? And to have a vast array of people who can speak to whatever that sort of core story is that are trying to articulate on any given Sunday. So yeah, it's all about the stories. And if they can be funny and exciting and engaging, all the better, because they're much more pleasant to listen to. And also they seem to stick more.
That's great. This is for anyone also. With folks who have multiple gifts, how have you chosen which one to focus on or pursue? And you all have multiple gifts. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that one and the fork in the road one, because I think they kind of align a little bit. I decided I was working at Charlotte Country Day as a Hearst teaching fellow, and I was trying to decide whether I was going to extend my year there and be full-time or go to graduate school. And I decided to go to graduate school because I had fallen off a little bit from my community engaged, community informed work. And I was really incredibly still passionate about that. And so I ended up getting this master's degree. And and I honestly can't explain it other than I knew that I obviously loved working with the students. I loved being present and being able to provide a space for them, especially the ones who were Black and brown and needed faculty to reflect them. But I also knew that I was a lot more, I had a lot more to give outside in my community too, not just inside of the Charlotte Country Day one. And so in that moment, I also realized that that's kind of where I started to form my interests in predominantly visual art, and kind of sticking towards as commissions from the Panthers and from the Hornets and Converse came in, that I kind of stuck to I had said, I did photography, I did this, I did that. I ended up sticking to painting, digital art, and I'm going to call it customizations, but ultimately it's painting and drawing. And I realized that those are ways that one, can express myself incredibly well, whether it's digital or on a different surface like a wall or concrete. But then I also recognize that stylistically, that's exactly what they are. And they're much more, I think, reflective of how I experience the world. And photography and all that other fun stuff is cool too. But I just find that the things that I enjoy doing lands inside of painting and drawing.
Yeah. And Makayla, you've had a request from someone in the Q&A to show some of your public art. And so we'll have to follow up to this Zoom with with a link to some of your public art?
Yeah, I responded with my Instagram and my my website.
Great. We'll try to add that too to our follow-up from this. So I'm going to do a quick, just one speed question, and that is, what advice do you wish someone had given you, or would you want to pass on to the next generation of women storytellers? Many of you are the first sort of in your career that you had to break through, you had to try not to fail, you had to do all of that. What advice do you wish someone had given you, or would you like to pass on to our next generation of women storytellers?
I'm happy to lead with that one. I'm going to borrow advice that was given to me by Sue Ross. Many people here will remember Sue. She was initially Associate Dean of Students and then Registrar and also a member of the English department. And she told me to stop thinking about my career in such a linear way. And meaning, don't envision your resume with one experience logically following the next, and instead think about our lives as mosaics, and with each experience, both professional and personal, represented by a tile. And in the moment, we don't know exactly how that tile fits or what the final image is going to be. But in the end, we see that each tile or experience that we have does fit, and it connects, and they're all relevant.
That's a beautiful image, and it's very appropriate for our storytelling and conversation tonight. Anybody else? Other pieces of advice?
I can go. So this is a piece of advice that I got from an attorney. So I was speaking to an attorney about an IP issue that was sort of a conflict. And I went into this meeting. It was the first time I'd ever worked with an attorney and the first time I'd ever had an IP issue. And so I was very nervous and also trying to sort of project this image of like righteous indignation and rage, and so I was like, oh, I'm gonna, I've got to do this. And so go, speak with this woman. She'd been recommended by another Davidson alum. So, had some confidence in her. And she was like, she'd sort of heard the issue and she said, you can just be nice. Like you can just kindly ask them to release you from this contract. And I was like, really? And and we did, and it was great, and it just went really well. And so the piece of advice that I think I take from that is that it's okay to just be who you are. Like you don't that I felt like I didn't have to put on this other sort of professional or aggressive persona to get what I needed. I could just use the tools that I have, whatever that person, my personality, which is not aggressive. I could just use my personality and it would supply me enough tools to get to that next step. Other person, and other people can be authentically who they are. And it's not that we don't learn anything, that we don't add tools to that toolbox, but we don't have to fundamentally change who we are in order to advance to some next step.
That's brilliant. Be who you are authentically. And I think we're going to end on that. And I'm going to pass this back over to Judith Rolls and encourage everybody to register for Reunion and find these wonderful women and have great conversations at Reunion with them. Thank you for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria and Kathy and Makayla and Caroline and Yvette, for taking the time to speak with all of us this evening and leading us in this conversation. You have given us much to think about. A follow-up email will be sent tomorrow with contact information, a short survey, and some other helpful information. This event was recorded and will be available on the website in the next few days. So feel free to come back and listen to any parts that were particularly of interest, and also share the link with others that you think might enjoy listening to this program. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. We hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thank you.